Good afternoon, folks. Hope you're having a wonderful day today. Today we're going to cover the digestive system in lab. The digestive system begins in the head with our mouth, and we're going to chew and swallow. And then after we swallow, we head down the esophagus, and from the esophagus, we head into the stomach. From the stomach, we digest proteins mainly there, and then we head down into our small intestines through the duodenum, jejunum, and ileum of the small intestines until we reach the large intestines. And the large intestines has the cecum, the colon, various parts, and the rectum before we hit the exit, which is the anus. So the digestive chapter, we're going to see several different components. We're going to first start in the head region. And when we start in the head region, this is very similar to what we saw in respiratory. There was that nasal cavity. Now we're really focusing on the mouth region, the oral areas, because we're focusing more on food and water. So whenever we're focusing here in the oral area, we see, first off, let's identify this muscle. There is the tongue, right? So the tongue, on my list, is about halfway down the page. But here is the tongue, large muscle used for chewing and also for speaking. And surrounding the tongue, we kind of see this open cavity. That is our oral cavity. So that is the inside of your mouth. So there's the oral cavity. We can see some teeth, right? And at the base of the teeth, if you look really close, you can see the gums, right? So they're kind of that Caucasian skin tone. We're seeing the gums surrounding the teeth. And the proper term for the gums are gingiva or gingivae, right? So gingiva is singular, gingivae is plural. And at the front of the teeth, and kind of what the gingivae help create, is this little pocket, right? This little pocket right in front of your teeth. Some people may choose to dip tobacco, and so this is where they're going to put that, dip or chew tobacco. And so they're going to put that in the what's called the vestibule or the labial vestibule. Don't forget vestibule, we use that also up here for entrance pocket. And so the entrance pocket into your oral cavity is called the oral vestibule or the labial vestibule, either way. Now again, we see some teeth here, but we're going to use a different image to show the region of the teeth, the tissue of the teeth, and the types of teeth. So let's move on and let's cover the palate one more time. Here is the palate. Again, towards the front, we have the hard palate, and towards the back, we have the soft palate. And as I mentioned under the respiratory lab, I didn't make you label it, but now let's label the very tip of the soft palate. And this is that little grape that hangs down, looks like a little punching bag in the back of your throat. The very end of the soft palate is the uvula, right? So there is your uvula. And so the uvula is important. When food or water hits it, it starts the swallowing process in your esophagus. It also helps whenever you swallow, whenever you put food back here, it helps the soft palate and the uvula push backwards, and they go from more vertical to more horizontal. And when the uvula touches the pharynx, then that's also another trigger to start this esophagus pumping. Okay, called the swallowing reflex. Now again, it's just a review, so I'm going to hit it quickly. Here is the pharynx, right? Back of the nose region all the way down to the beginning, the split between the larynx and the esophagus. So here is the pharynx. Nasopharynx was at the top, and we learned a couple of things there for respiratory. Oropharynx is where the oral cavity enters in the middle. And at the bottom, we're going to split, and that's going to be our laryngopharynx. And so the laryngopharynx between the larynx and the esophagus, right? Now, that's pretty much all that we can get off of this image. I want to now take a look at the tooth, and this is kind of might be a little different than the one that you have in your lab manual, but this is a labeled one that I'd like to use. Here we can kind of see a region, and I wish that we could see this from the side, but the white area that sticks out of the gums is called the crown. The region that we don't see that's implanted into your skull is the root, and the boundary between the two, right there between the white and this more yellowish, is called the neck, right? So those are just general regions. When we look at the crown, we can see that the crown is covered with this white substance, the hardest substance any animal can make. This is enamel. So here is enamel. And this enamel, it protects the tooth. It's very hard, so it's involved with chewing. But once you damage it, it doesn't regrow. So despite what some of these toothpaste companies claim, you can't regrow enamel. Once you make it, you're kind of done with it. And that's the reason that if we have cavities, we have to get fillings, because it kind of fills the dentin, which is this inner component. This tissue on the inside is dentin, and so it's bony like. And so if this gets decay in it, then we're going to have to remove the dentin and put fill that cavity with a filling, and then we're going to have to also kind of recreate the outside appearance and the outside enamel with that filling. Now, the outer layer of the root is really hard to see, but the outer layer of the root is called cementum. Cementum's a good term because it helps cement the tooth into the skull and kind of keep it there in place, make sure it doesn't, fall out. On the inside, we have a hollow region, but it's not hollow. It's got a living tissue in it. The hollow area is called the pulp cavity. The tissue that's in there, and here we see red, white, we kind of see red for blood vessels and blue for blood vessels and white for nerves. And so that connective tissue is called pulp. So the pulp cavity is filled with pulp, and this is what keeps the tooth alive. If you have a root canal, they have to go in and chop off the top of the crown to have access into the pulp cavity, and then they have to remove all of the pulp cavity. You've done damage all the way to the pulp cavity if you have a root canal, be it through decay or be it through some kind of accident. And so then you have to remove that pulp so that you can remove the sensation of pain, right? And you're actually killing that tooth. And then you're going to kind of fashion the crown into almost a peg, and you're going to add a fake top part of the tooth on there, and that's what we call a crown, right? So if you get a crown, it means that they're replacing the outer top part of the tooth, right? That's more visible. Now, we have 4 different types of teeth, and I personally like for you to know the dental formula for all great apes, and we are one of the great apes. There's only 5, and we're one of them. The dental formula is 2, 1, 2, 3, and that means, put it out beside these teeth on our list: 2 incisors, 1 cuspid, 2 premolars, and 3 molars, and this is on each half of a jaw. So if we started in the front, right in the middle, right? On each side from the middle, we should have 2 incisors for a total of 4 in the front. On each side, we should have 1 canine. Behind that canine, on each side, we should have 2 premolars. And here's what we're seeing: 2 incisors towards the front, and these are more like scissors for cutting. 1 canine behind it. And the canine is also called a cuspid because this hump is called a cusp, and this is good for tearing and shredding. And then behind it, we've got 2 premolars, and behind the premolars, we've got 3 molars, and that 3rd molar is your wisdom tooth, that last one that comes in. So we have 2, 1, 2, 3. That's an easy way to remember it. But also on the test, if I'm pointing to one of these and you get confused, you can always go 2, 1, 2, 3 and kind of figure out which ones we got. But also, that's what orangutans have, right? That's what gorillas have. That's what bonobos have. That's what all of the great apes have. Now, also in this view, we can see the salivary glands. So the salivary glands, we can see 2 of the salivary glands here. This salivary gland right here kind of wraps around this muscle underneath your tongue, and it comes around this way. It actually wraps underneath the jaw, underneath the jawbone, underneath your mandible. This is your submandibular gland, and it has one single duct called the submandibular duct, or Wharton's duct. Either way, I prefer submandibular. It's just easy. So the submandibular duct comes out, and it hits right at the front of the tongue at the base of your teeth, or right behind your teeth. And so this is the one that sometimes guys will kind of make a little spit stream come out of their mouth, just a tiny little spit stream. And what they're basically doing is just milking this gland, right? They're milking it and causing it to spit outwards out of their mouth. Pretty gross. This one right here in the background is under the tongue, and it has more than one duct leading to the exits. This is your sublingual gland, and each one of these little tubes in between the yellow that's leading out onto the surface of the base of the oral cavity is called a sublingual duct, or the ducts of Rivenus. Either way is acceptable for this test. Now this view right here only has two labels, and this is for our parotid gland, which is kind of, here's the ramus of the mandible, here's our masseter muscle, right? So kind of behind it and tucked kind of in front of the ear, we're going to see is the parotid gland. And the parotid gland has one duct that comes out, the parotid duct or Stenson's duct, and this duct punctures through your cheek and actually squirts saliva onto the upper second molar. If you take your tongue and you put it on the cheek right beside where you chew from the top, from the back molar, second from the back molar on the top, then you're going to feel a little divot in your cheek, a little puncture in your cheek. And that's actually where the Stenson's duct or this parotid duct enters into your oral cavity. Now here again is the entire system kind of in a nutshell. We've just kind of finished with the oral region. Now we're going to start to head down through the esophagus. So here is the esophagus, and this is really kind of the beginning of the tract. We left the pharynx and now we're into the esophagus, muscular tube. Basically there's nothing going on in the thoracic cavity for digestion. We're just transporting with the esophagus. We get below the diaphragm and that's where the action starts to pick up. Here we see the stomach, the first big expansion of our, or the first big component of our digestive tract that's doing a little bit more function. All through this digestive tract, we're going to make mucus, right? But here in the stomach, we're going to make some enzymes, pepsin, that's going to digest proteins. So the stomach is an enlarged pocket of the tract. When we look at it, we've got this entrance region. The entrance region is called the cardia. The constriction itself at the beginning of the cardia is called the cardiac sphincter. So the whole area is the cardia, and the constriction there is the cardiac sphincter. This pouch, top pouch of the stomach, is called the fundus. We're going to learn that the word fundus means pouch, so that's very apropos. So there is the fundus, and then we're going to reach the body. So here is the body of the stomach, and the body of the stomach is where most of the churning takes place. Then we hit the pylorus. Excuse me, I almost said the wrong term. We hit the pylorus, the last part. It kind of looks like the letter J a little bit, and so this bottom uptick kind of coming back up in the J is the pylorus. And at the very end of the stomach, we have another constriction, the pyloric sphincter. This is kind of the guardian to allow food to exit the stomach. In the stomach, we see these folds, and these folds are called rugae. Rugae are kind of expandable folds, but they're also used for traction, really. They can help grab the food and churn that food. And so they're kind of acting like little fingers massaging the food to try to break it apart as well. Let's see here. What else do we have on stomach? Looks like we also have greater and lesser curvature, and this isn't that tough. The medial side is the lesser curvature because it's a small curve, and the lateral side of the stomach, facing more towards the outside of the body, is going to be the greater curvature, right? So that's not too difficult. It's really just talking about which side's more curvy, right? Which one's longer. Greater curvature towards lateral, lesser curvature towards medial. Then we enter into the small intestines. We can identify the very first part of the small intestines right here. This is called the duodenum or duodenum. So the first part of the small intestines is the duodenum or duodenum. It receives the acidic chyme, this partially digested mixture of food that's in the stomach. It receives that. So part of the job is to buffer this, to change the acidity back closer to 7. But also, we're going to add some accessory structure secretions. We're going to see the liver and the pancreas is going to secrete into the duodenum. And we talk about that a lot better in lecture. Inside the duodenum, we see some rings. These rings are actually big folds around the inside of the tube. These are called plica, or plicae circularis, either way. Plica or plica or plicae circularis. Do not use the term circular folds. That is not a correct term. We want to use plica or plica instead. You can either just use that one word or you can add the circularis onto it, but we can't just call them circular folds. That's kind of elementary school, right? Now, here are the majority of our small intestines, and I can't really ask you where is the jejunum and where is the ileum. The jejunum is the second part. So if I point to these small intestines, I've got to kind of clue you in a little bit better. I've got to ask you, what is this whole thing? Or another question would be, what is the second part of these noodles? That would be jejunum. And then the last one would be what is the third part, and that would be the ileum, right? I could say what's the first part, the duodenum, but I can also point out where the duodenum is, right? Now, the jejunum is where most digestion finishes and where we're going to absorb most nutrients into the body. And then the ileum is where we kind of take a lot of the waste material that we didn't absorb and we start to move it out towards our waste compactor, right? Our garbage compactor, which is our colon. And so here we're going to see the exit of the ileum. And we see a little constriction right there. This exit is called the ileocecal valve. And the ileocecal valve leads into this very first pocket. So the ileocecal valve is a little bit on top of that, and it's leading out of the ileum. This first pocket is called the cecum. And so the cecum is a little pocket at the bottom right of our abdominal region. And hanging off of the cecum, we see the appendix. This thing's shaped like a worm, and the word for that is vermiform. So here we see the vermiform appendix, and this is your appendix that could rupture. It's not a functioning tissue, but it's still living tissue, so it can still become infected. And because of that, it could become appendicitis. And if it ruptures, then you have feces inside of your body cavity, and that's going to set up a very bad situation. Gangrene and sepsis is going to set in. And if you don't get help quickly, you're going to end up dying, right? And that's what happens if your appendix ruptures. Now, after the cecum, we start to head up. We head uphill, and here's the ascending colon, right? Now, they removed the transverse colon. They put it to the side over here so we could kind of see these structures behind it. But the ascending colon should make a bend right here, and that's going to be called either the right colic flexure, or because it's below the liver, we can call it the hepatic flexure. So the bend right here would be the right colic or hepatic flexure. And then we see this portion that should be right here. This would be the transverse colon. And then on the left side, we have another bend, left colic flexure, or because it's right beside the spleen, we can call it the splenic flexure. And then we've got to head down. So this left side of the colon is the descending colon before we start to kind of swoop back up. And behind you, you don't see the full S shape. But in order for this to become the rectum, this has to kind of make an S, right? So this S-shaped portion is the sigmoid colon. And it's a little bit hidden. We just see the beginning of the S right here with it curving. As I mentioned, the sigmoid colon ends right here, and here we see the rectum. This last part of the digestive tract is the rectum, and the opening at the exit is the anus. Okay, opening at the exit is the anus. You can mark out the internal and the external anal sphincters. We can kind of see these anal sphincters to the side. This is what controls the opening and closing of that region to allow that waste to be expelled out of the body. Now, we have some accessory structures that we're going to look at. So the first thing that we're going to look at is going to be the pancreas. So the first thing we look at is the pancreas. When we look at the pancreas, here is our duodenum. This is something we should notice. The duodenum always wraps around the head of the pancreas. So this region here, whatever the pancreas region that's touching the head, touching the duodenum, is referred to as the head. And then we see this skinny part heading out towards the spleen, and this is our body of the pancreas. And then right here, making contact, coming close to the spleen, not really merging into it, is the tail. So a head, body, and a tail. Now, the main job of the pancreas is not to control blood sugar. The main job of the pancreas is to make digestive enzymes. And here we see the main tube from which all these regions are spitting their digestive enzymes into. And everybody pay attention to this. Here is the main pancreatic duct, but watch this. It looks like it goes straight, but it doesn't. The main pancreatic duct makes the S and opens right here. There's two openings into the duodenum. The lower opening is where the major pancreatic duct opens, and this is called the main this is this is what's called the major duodenal papilla. There's a little mound here, and the word for mound is papilla, and so there's an opening on that papilla, and this is our major duodenal papilla exiting from the main pancreatic duct. Now this one that goes straight right here, that kind of continues to go straight instead of making the bend, this is the accessory pancreatic duct, and this is going to open right here at the minor duodenal papilla. The one that's above it is the minor duodenal papilla, and this is the opening. Now at the major duodenal papilla, we also see the bile duct coming down, and up here is supposed to represent the gallbladder and the liver. And so here, I want you to realize, I keep mentioning the liver and the pancreas secrete into the duodenum, and here we can see it. There's the pancreas, and here's the liver secreting its bile. Now, let's look a little bit at the liver, and well, let's look a little bit at the liver, and then we'll look at the gallbladder. Okay, so I'm going to switch this up a little bit according to how it's listed in our notes. This is a posterior view. I want you to realize that. This is a posterior view. Right here is our left lobe, and it's very skinny. You can't really see it, but it's kind of skinny wrapped around. It's got to give room for the stomach underneath it, and so it's got to kind of accommodate, kind of like the lungs had to accommodate for the heart with that cardiac notch. So left lobe. Over here, we have the right lobe, and this is a big fat lobe. Okay, this is the bigger fat lobe. Now, in the middle, towards the top, we've got the caudate lobe beside the vena cava. Always remember C and C, cava and caudate. So there's the caudate lobe. And down below, we have the quadrate lobe, and C is before Q in the alphabet. So here is our quadrate lobe. And this is right beside the gallbladder. So sometimes, you look at letters and sometimes you might confuse a Q for a G because they're both big round letters or something. So that might help you connect that too, something kind of silly that might actually help. Now, I mentioned this is the inferior vena cava. So this is taking used blood back to the heart. So that means that the vessels that attach to the inferior vena cava are the true hepatic veins, right? And we saw this in our lab manual when we covered blood vessels, how these were some of the first veins that branch back underneath the diaphragm. So there's the hepatic veins, and these are bringing filtered blood back out of the liver, okay? These are our two input vessels. Here we have the hepatic artery. Okay, this red vessel is the hepatic artery, and it leads down to the cystic artery that we might cover on the gallbladder, but there's the hepatic artery. And right beside it is the vessel bringing nutrients in that we've talked about. This is the hepatic portal vein. So the blue one is the portal vein, and the red one is the actual artery. Now, both of these are input vessels. Even though this is a vein, don't forget this is bringing all the blood absorbed with nutrients straight to the liver so we can bank those nutrients. And so both of these are heading into our liver. Now, when we look at this gallbladder, here is the gallbladder, and this is where we store bile. The liver makes bile, and the gallbladder stores it. If you look closely, right there is one green tube on the left side, and right here is a green tube coming from the right side. So I'm going to show you this view. Here from the left side is our left hepatic duct, and here from our right side, because it branched underneath and kind of grabbed it from the right side, is our right hepatic duct. Now when these two merge, they're going to form the common hepatic duct, and we see that common hepatic duct right there. And then if we are eating fat, bile helps to break down fat in our diet. This bile may just head on out through the last duct called the common bile duct, and they've chopped it right there. This is a super long one. This is the one that heads down, punctures through the pancreas, and secretes into the major duodenal papilla. But if we're not eating fat at the moment, we may store most of that bile, all that bile. And so we're going to head down into the gallbladder through this tube right here, and this is called our cystic duct. So the cystic duct heads down into the gallbladder and actually stores the bile, and then whenever we need that, it can squirt a little bit and force that out and into the common bile duct. But again, the common bile duct is the last one after they all merge. Now again, we can see that here is the cystic artery. As I mentioned, the term cystic many times refers to the gallbladder. And so here is our cystic artery, and that was just a branch off of, we kind of see this branch off of the hepatic artery, and there is that cystic artery, right? Now, underneath the liver, I forgot to mention that I want you to mark out the falciform ligament and the coronary ligament. I just don't think that they're very effective on these images. We can mention those in lecture, but I'm not going to cover them in lab. Here's the image that I want to use for the lining of the small intestines, or the wall of the small intestines. Here we see an upper pink layer, a layer underneath it that's yellow. We see a red layer and a thin outer yellow layer. The thin outer yellow layer is the serosa. The red layer above it is the muscularis externa. The yellowish layer above that is the submucosa, and so that makes this upper pink layer the mucosa, right? So mucosa, submucosa, muscularis externa, and serosa. So there's our 4 major layers. When we look at the muscularis externa, we have some muscles that run the length of the tube called longitudinal layers, the muscularis externa longitudinal layer. And then we have these circular layers that go around the tube that can help open and close the tube. And so these are our circular layer of the muscularis externa. Okay. Now, I don't really care about the plexus of Auerbach or the myenteric plexus, nerve plexus. That's these white structures in here. I'm not really concerned about that, so we can mark that out. We get up to the submucosa. The submucosa, if we see some fat down in here, we also see some lymph nodules. I don't really want you to point out lymph nodules on this model, so you can mark that one out as well, but that's the green structures, mint green. But we see blood vessels, right? So down here we see the submucosal plexus. That's what these blood vessels are referred to as, is the submucosal plexus. And these are the blood vessels that take the nutrients that were absorbed up here, because this mucosal layer is what's actually touching food and nutrients. So it absorbs the nutrients, and then we put them into these blood vessels and we shuttle it straight to the liver, right? Up here in the mucosa, we see these finger-like projections. The finger-like projections are called villi, or each one individually is called a villus. Inside, or covering the villus, we see intestinal epithelium. So the pink covering, and if you zoom in, you can see some boxes in here. The pink covering here is the intestinal epithelium. And at the base, in between some of these, we see intestinal pits or intestinal glands or intestinal crypts. Either term is fine, okay? And here's where we're going to make the secretions that help to finish digestion, make some mucus as well. Now, we also see below that the muscularis interna. So this layer right here, this one muscle layer that separates mucosa from submucosa, is the muscularis interna or the muscularis mucosa. Either way is fine with me. Now, when we look on the inside of these villi and these fingers, I love this old school model because red's arteries, blue's veins, and purple are now capillaries. And that makes sense, right? So these purples that we see, especially right here, these purple networks on the inside of these villi are the villus capillaries. This is what we're going to absorb. We're going to absorb carbs and proteins into the villus capillaries, but the fats, we have to sneak them in. So we have to sneak them into the lymphatic system. And again, lymphatic system here is going to be green. So we see these mint green stalks. These are called the lacteals. A lacteal is where we get fat in. It heads down into these lymph regions, and it kind of heads out of the digestive tract in that process. So at that point, we have now finished digestion. And that wraps up for our next lab test. So make sure that you're getting prepared for that and studying as well as you can. If you have any questions, please contact me. But otherwise, I hope that you have a wonderful day. Thank you.